Somewhere tonight, someone is about to be underestimated. Before we begin, pause for a second. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. A city, a country, a tiny dot on the map? Because this story travels across borders, across expectations, across something far more stubborn than distance: pride. It begins with laughter, the casual kind, the dismissive kind, the kind that sounds harmless until it isn't. This is not a story about politics, not about war, not about history textbooks. This is a story about taste, identity, and the strange way food can challenge certainty. This is the night spaghetti became a battlefield no one expected. They said it was not real pasta. They said sweetness had no place here. They said culinary traditions are not playgrounds. When Filipino spaghetti arrived at an international food showcase in Tel Aviv, it did not arrive quietly. It never does. Bright red sauce, a glossy, cheerful defiance, grated cheese falling like snow, hot dogs sliced into unapologetic circles. To some observers, it looked less like cuisine and more like confusion. To others, curiosity wrapped in nostalgia. But curiosity rarely speaks first. Judgment does. And judgment, as always, arrived faster than understanding. Smiles turned into smirks, smirks into laughter, laughter into commentary. The dish had entered a room where elegance was expected, and innocence looked suspicious. Israeli cuisine, like many great food cultures, carries a deep sense of identity, a fusion of histories, migrations, survival, reinvention, flavors layered with memory, spices that whisper stories older than borders. Food here is not merely sustenance, it is belonging served on a plate. So when something as visually rebellious as Filipino spaghetti, among hummus variations, artisan breads, delicate pastries, and slow-cooked traditions, reactions were predictable. Not hostility, not anger, something subtler, amusement mixed with disbelief. How could pasta be sweet? Why hot dogs? Why this carnival of red? It was not mockery born of cruelty. It was disbelief born of unfamiliarity. But disbelief, even polite, still draws a line. To understand the discomfort, you must understand expectation. Pasta carries emotional weight worldwide, a symbol of technique, restraint, balance. Filipino spaghetti ignores restraint entirely. It celebrates excess. Sugar leaning into sauce, banana ketchup rewriting acidity, cheese softening everything into comfort. It is not designed to impress critics. It is engineered to make children smile. To Filipinos, this dish is childhood memory condensed into flavor. Birthday parties, paper plates, family noise. It is joy, not precision. But joy can look unserious in rooms trained to respect refinement. And so the whispers began. Interesting, different, confusing. Words that sound diplomatic, yet quietly translate into something else. This does not belong here. But food festivals have a peculiar rule. Eventually, someone tastes. It started cautiously. A fork lifted like evidence under examination, a hesitant twirl, a small bite taken more for curiosity than appetite. And then something curious unfolded. Eyebrows did not shoot upward in horror. They paused, then lowered. A blink, a second bite, a pause longer than the first. Confusion, yes, but confusion softened by something unexpected. Familiarity, not a flavor, but a feeling. It tasted happy. Not elegant, not sophisticated. Happy. The kind of taste that does not challenge your intellect, but disarms your defenses. Laughter shifted pitch, less sharp, less certain. The room had begun its slow negotiation with surprise. One attendee laughed after tasting, but the laughter had changed texture. "This makes no sense," he said, already reaching for another bite. Another shook her head while smiling. "It's wrong," she murmured, "but it's not bad." And therein lies the fracture point. When expectation collides with pleasure, certainty begins to wobble. Filipino spaghetti does not seek approval through tradition. It bypasses tradition entirely. It speaks directly to emotion, sweetness triggering comfort, softness inviting memory, simplicity dissolving resistance. The dish was doing something profoundly disruptive. It was not arguing its legitimacy. It was creating enjoyment too immediate to dismiss. And enjoyment, unlike ideology, is stubbornly persuasive. Meanwhile, across the exhibition floor, something else was happening. Crowds, not massive at first, but steady. People returning, bringing friends. You have to try this. The most powerful force in food culture is repetition. A dish tasted once sparks opinion. Tasted twice sparks curiosity. Tasted 3 times sparks attachment. Soon, Filipino spaghetti was no longer the strange red pasta. It was the booth with the smiling reactions. Cameras lingered, social feeds filled, short clips capturing the most addictive narrative arc, skepticism transforming into reluctant delight. The internet thrives on transformation, and Filipino spaghetti delivers transformation with theatrical consistency. Each reaction became silent marketing, each smile an algorithmic invitation. But the real shift did not occur online. It occurred in conversation. Chefs, bloggers, food enthusiasts began discussing the dish not as a joke, but as a puzzle. Why does this work? Why is sweetness comforting here? Why does something so technically incorrect feel emotionally correct? Filipino cuisine, like Israeli cuisine, is built on adaptation. Colonial histories, ingredient substitutions, creativity under constraint. Banana ketchup was not invention for novelty. It was necessity becoming identity. Suddenly, the dish stopped looking ridiculous. It started looking familiar in spirit. Reinvention is rarely respected until its logic is understood. And logic, once revealed, has a way of quieting laughter. The contest itself, a crowd-judged tasting event, did not reward technical mastery. No rigid rulebooks, no institutional guardianship. Just people, disposable forks, and a simple question. Which dish would you choose again? This is where culinary hierarchies blur, because taste, stripped of prestige, becomes brutally democratic. The voting jar sat indifferent to tradition, ballots collected without sentimentality. Filipino spaghetti was never designed for Michelin stars. It was designed for craving. And craving, unlike critique, does not consult cultural authority. It simply returns. Bite after bite, smile after smile. The dish accumulated something far more dangerous than approval: preference. When preliminary results emerged, murmurs replaced amusement. The red pasta was ranking unexpectedly high. Not dominating, not yet, but competing. Competing was the shock. Because legitimacy often arrives not through victory, but through survival of expectation. The assumption had never been that Filipino spaghetti might lose. The assumption had been that it could never contend. Now, that assumption was quietly eroding. Food writers began reframing their language. Less humor, more intrigue. The narrative had shifted from, "What is this?" to, "Why are people choosing this?" And questions, unlike ridicule, opened doors. Filipino spaghetti had crossed the invisible border between novelty and relevance. Final voting night carried an atmosphere thicker than anticipation. No dramatic speeches, no orchestral tension, just numbers waiting to rearrange perception. And then, improbably, the outcome crystallized. Filipino spaghetti secured the People's Choice Award, not the judge's technical distinction, not a category tailored to comfort foods, the overall crowd preference. Silence arrived first. Silence always does when expectation collapses. Then came laughter again, but this time, disbelief flavored with admiration, surprise flavored with respect, because the dish had done something extraordinary. It had not defeated tradition, it had bypassed it, winning not by being better, but by being wanted. Victory here was psychological, not hierarchical. Israeli cuisine did not lose, Italian pasta traditions did not crumble, but Filipino spaghetti achieved something rarer than dominance: acceptance without assimilation. It did not change itself to win. It did not apologize for sweetness. It did not hide its hot dogs. It remained joyfully itself. And the crowd, liberated from inherited expectations, responded not to rules, but to feeling. This distinction matters because food cultures rarely clash over flavor. They clash over legitimacy. Filipino spaghetti did not demand legitimacy. It generated affection. And affection, once widespread, rewrites legitimacy far more effectively than argument ever could. In interviews afterward, reactions revealed something deeper than culinary surprise. It reminds me of something, one voter admitted, struggling to define the memory. Another smiled knowingly. It tastes like comfort without effort. A chef offered the most revealing insight. We judge unfamiliar food by our rules, he said, but pleasure does not follow rules. Filipino spaghetti thrives precisely because it rejects intimidation. It is emotionally accessible, instantly legible, sweetness signaling safety, softness signaling familiarity. In a world saturated with complexity, simplicity becomes magnetic. The dish did not conquer palates, it disarmed them, and disarmament in any arena changes everything. Food historians observing the phenomenon would later note a familiar pattern. Many globally beloved dishes were once considered culinary heresy, fusion rejected, adaptations mocked, innovations dismissed. Pizza was once regional, sushi once exotic, street foods once inferior. Popularity does not always follow prestige. Often it undermines it. Filipino spaghetti occupies this lineage of underestimated joy. Its success lies not in technical brilliance, but emotional engineering, designed for happiness, optimized for nostalgia, structured for repeat craving. The contest outcome did not elevate the dish into haute cuisine, it elevated it into conversation. And conversation, unlike trophies, sustains cultural migration. Back in Israel, something subtle but irreversible had shifted. Filipino spaghetti became less of a curiosity and more of a reference point. Food blogs revisited it, restaurants experimented cautiously with sweeter sauces, home cooks attempted versions out of intrigue rather than imitation. The laughter that once framed the dish did not vanish, it evolved, became playful, affectionate, knowing. The spaghetti that surprised us. Humor remained, but stripped of dismissal. Because familiarity softens judgment. Once a flavor enters memory, it stops being foreign. Filipino spaghetti had entered memory, and memory, unlike opinion, is remarkably difficult to argue with. Meanwhile, Filipino communities abroad watched with a recognition bordering on amusement. They had seen this story before. The cycle of ridicule, curiosity, reluctant appreciation. Filipino cuisine has long lived in the shadows of louder culinary identities, yet its power has always been the same: emotional resonance. Dishes designed not for ceremony, but comfort, not for prestige, but participation. Filipino spaghetti winning a crowd contest was not shocking to Filipinos. It was inevitable, because the dish was never competing on technical grounds. It was competing on happiness. And happiness, once tasted, travels faster than skepticism. There is a reason sweetness provokes such divided reactions in savory context. It disrupts expectation, but disruption is often the birthplace of affection. Filipino spaghetti functions like edible nostalgia, even for those without Filipino childhoods. Sweetness mirrors celebratory foods across cultures. Soft textures echo comfort dishes worldwide. Its unfamiliarity is visual. Its emotional logic is universal. This is the quiet genius of the dish. It feels foreign only until tasted. Then, inexplicably, it feels familiar. And familiarity, especially unexpected, creates one of the most addictive human responses: delight. What makes this story remarkable is not victory itself, but transformation of perception. No dish requires unanimous approval to become influential. It requires a tribe large enough to defend its joy. Filipino spaghetti's tribe expanded beyond nationality, beyond diaspora, beyond cultural boundaries. Each skeptical taster converted into a reluctant advocate, each advocate into silent ambassador.
Food influence rarely spreads through institutional endorsement. It spreads through repetition of pleasure. Someone tastes, someone smiles, someone recommends. Cultural migration disguised as casual enjoyment. This is how unfamiliar dishes quietly rewrite global taste landscapes. In the aftermath, commentary from Israeli food critics reflected a surprising humility. It challenges our assumptions, one columnist wrote. Another framed it anthropologically, a dish built for emotion, competing with dishes built for tradition. The reframing mattered, because criticism shifted from ridicule to analysis. Analysis signals respect. Respect signals legitimacy. Filipino spaghetti had crossed yet another invisible boundary. No longer amusing anomaly, now subject of inquiry. An inquiry, unlike dismissal, sustains relevance. A dish worthy of study is a dish worthy of space. Perhaps the most revealing moment came from a young attendee interviewed weeks later. Adults think too much about food, she shrugged. This one just tastes fun. Fun, a deceptively simple verdict, yet profoundly disruptive. Because culinary prestige often thrives on seriousness. Filipino spaghetti thrives on playfulness. It does not aspire upward, it radiates outward, designed for delight rather than reverence. And delight, especially in public voting arenas, is extraordinarily competitive. The contest outcome was not a fluke. It was emotional mathematics unfolding predictably. Food, at its core, is memory architecture. Israeli cuisine builds memory through heritage, ritual, continuity. Filipino spaghetti builds memory through celebration, childhood, abundance simulated from scarcity. Both are authentic expressions of cultural experience. Authenticity does not demand uniformity, it demands sincerity. Filipino spaghetti's sincerity is unmistakable. It tastes like intention made edible. Intention not to impress, but to comfort. And comfort, unlike sophistication, rarely requires explanation. The broader lesson of this story extends beyond pasta. Cultural friction often emerges not from difference itself, but from interpretation of difference. Filipino spaghetti looked like parody only until its context was understood. Context transforms absurdity into logic. Logic transforms ridicule into curiosity. Curiosity transforms resistance into openness. The dish did not change, perception did. And perception, once altered, rarely returns unchanged. In global food culture, victories are rarely absolute. Traditions endure, preferences evolve. Filipino spaghetti did not replace established cuisines. It inserted itself into possibility, became an option rather than an argument, an invitation rather than a challenge. Try mine too. Few strategies travel farther. Back at the contest venue, the Filipino booth operators later reflected on the experience with understated amusement. They had not arrived expecting revolution, only participation, only sharing. Yet sharing, repeated often enough, becomes influence. Influence, accumulated quietly, becomes legitimacy. The dish had done what food does best, persuaded without debate.
Somewhere along this journey, laughter completed its evolution from "what is this?" to "why do I like this?" to "where can I find more?" That final question marks the true threshold of culinary victory. Craving replacing critique, desire replacing doubt. Phil Spaghetti's rise illustrates an overlooked truth. Culinary power does not belong exclusively to refinement. It belongs equally to emotional impact. A dish that makes people feel good competes on terrain prestige cannot monopolize. Israeli voters did not abandon tradition. They simply acknowledged pleasure. Pleasure is stubbornly apolitical, indifferent to hierarchy. Filipino spaghetti succeeded because it understood something fundamental. Happiness is globally fluent. Food cultures, like people, expand not by erasing identity, but encountering difference. Filipino spaghetti did not ask to be reclassified, only tasted. Tasting dissolved certainty. Certainty dissolved boundaries. And so, the most accurate ending is not that Israel laughed until Filipino spaghetti won. It is that laughter made room for curiosity, curiosity made room for pleasure, pleasure made room for acceptance.
Somewhere tonight, another unfamiliar dish waits under skeptical eyes. Another flavor waits to surprise certainty. Because history repeats itself, not through conflict alone, but through taste. And taste, patient and persistent, always gets the last word.